The reading today is from Daniel chapter 2. Nebuchadnezzar's dream. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams that troubled him, and sleep deserted him. So the king gave orders to summon the magicians, mediums, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. When they came and stood before the king, he said to them, "I have had a dream, and I am anxious to understand it." The Chaldeans spoke to the king, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will give the interpretation." The king replied to the Chaldeans, "My word is final. If you don't tell me the dream and its interpretation, you will be torn limb from limb, and your houses will be made a garbage dump. But if you make the dream and its interpretation known to me, you'll receive gifts, a reward and great honor from me. So make the dream and its interpretation known to me." They answered a second time, "May the king tell the dream to his servants, and we will make known the interpretation." The king replied, "I know for certain you are trying to gain some time because you see that my word is final. If you don't tell me the dream, there is one decree for you. You have conspired to tell me something false or fraudulent until the situation changes. So tell me the dream, and I will know that you can give its interpretation." The Chaldeans answered the king, "No one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of any magician, medium, or Chaldean. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals." Daniel answered the king, "No wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery he asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in the last days."
Well, good morning. If you are relatively new to Fellowship Pellissippi, my name is Brad, and I'm one of the pastors here. And we are walking through a series called Exiles in Babylon. We're looking at the book of Daniel, and it is an incredible model for what it looks like for you and I to live in a culture that might seem foreign or unusual. And the primary message that we've examined for the last couple of weeks, just a quick catch up if you're new with us or you might haven't got it on the podcast yet, the whole book of Daniel's theme could be summed up in this way: God is in control, even when it seems like your world is out of control. Matter of fact, on every page, at least for the first 6 chapters of Daniel, everything for Daniel and his buddies seems out of control, and it seems to go in chaos. These 4 young Hebrew boys that we are introduced to, they're ripped from their homeland. They're exiles in Babylon. They've been stripped of their culture. They've been stripped of their identity. Just about every hope and dream that they would have for their future has been removed, and they find themselves in this alternate reality. And in spite of all that, what makes their story so compelling is, even though they lost everything, their culture was stripped of them, their identity was stripped from them, they've been removed from their homeland, all the things that were precious to them are gone, they remain faithful to their God. Not only do they remain faithful to their God, but they thrive in a pagan foreign culture that is counterculture to everything that they believe in. Matter of fact, their conviction that God is in control, even when their world seems out of control, is so deep, it is so forming, and it is so shaping to them that it gives them the ability to trust God regardless of the circumstances they find themselves. And because of that trust, it empowers them to live extraordinary lives in the midst of extraordinary circumstances. Last week, we looked at this demonstration of winsome conviction that Daniel and his buddies modeled. Daniel and his friends, they have a deep set of values. They have a deep set of convictions. They have complete faith in the one true God. They want to stay faithful to God, and they do. When it comes to the choice to obey their God or to obey the whims of culture, they choose God. When it comes to bow down and give homage to a modern pagan culture or to give honor and true worship to their God, they stay faithful to their God. And at the same time, where they can cooperate for the good of the people in their culture, they cooperate. They show kindness, compassion, and strength in the midst of their deep conviction. This winsome conviction gives them an attractive witness. It gives them influence. Matter of fact, they rise and become influential at the top layers of all the political aspects of Babylon because of who they are. And here in chapter 2 today, we will get another layer of what it looks like for us to learn and lean in from Daniel and his friends, to trust that God is sovereign regardless of our circumstances. And no matter who's in the room today, chapter 2 has something for you. It will show you, chapter 2 will show you how to be a wiser and more effective follower of Jesus. If you're married, chapter 2 gives you some key principles to how you can be a better spouse. If you're a parent, how to be a better parent. Chapter 2 will help you be a better student for those of you who are still in school. For those of you who are in business, you're employees, you got a job, or you're looking for a job, chapter 2 will be an incredible help to you. If you're a friend and you just need to become a better friend, or you've got a friend going through a crisis, chapter 2 sheds light on that. If you're struggling financially, or if you're loaded and you're trying to figure out how to distribute your money more effectively, chapter 2 will help you with that. If you're a small group leader, if you are a disciple maker in our congregation, if you have influence with people in your community, in your workforce, and you want to be a faithful follower of Jesus that brings light, love, and hope and compassion to those around you, chapter 2 will be a super help to you. Now, on the surface, as we read that, as Jackie read the opening refrain of chapter 2, it's a bit extraordinary. It's a bit strange, even hard to believe. Chapter 2 involves a tyrannical world leader who's anxious over his dream, an underperforming group of sorcerers, and a weird statue combined with a coded message from an unsuspecting hero. Frankly, Daniel chapter 2 is one of the parts of the Bible that maybe some of your skeptical friends, maybe some of you, and if this includes you, I'm so glad you're here, have a difficulty with when it comes to the Bible. It's just, frankly, weird. It's the kind of part of the Bible that you roll your eyes at and see, why do you guys pay attention to this? Why do you guys take this seriously? Now, there's something ironic about that kind of tension, isn't it? Let me give you the list of the top 10 performing movies of 2019 in ranking of income. This is net earnings. Here are the top 10 grossing movies of just this past year. Avengers Endgame, The Lion King, Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, Frozen 2, Toy Story 4, Captain Marvel, Spider-Man Far From Home, Aladdin, Joker, and Jumanji, The Next Level. Has anyone in the room watched any of those movies at all? Anybody? All right, put your hands up, let me see. All right, I think I watched 9 of the 10 of those in this past year. And you know what? All 10 of the highest grossing movies of just this past year have in common? The supernatural. The peculiar. If you've watched any of these movies, toys are talking to us, animals are talking to us. There's this guy named Thanos that snaps and half the world disappears. Spider-Man's aunt is so irresponsible that she lets him go out in the middle of the night and fight bad guys. Jumanji is a board game that swallows people up. And if you watch The Joker, you probably needed therapy after watching The Joker. There's a correlation here that I want us to see. Is there something inside the human heart that yearns for something beyond just the natural? That yearns for something more than what is just merely explainable. There's something about us that it grabs our attention. So today, when you look at Daniel chapter 2, and then as we go through the series, especially when we get later in the spring, early summer, chapter 7 to 12, and you see things like the statue that is described in Daniel chapter 2, pay attention to it, but don't get overwhelmed with it. Because you know what Daniel chapter 2 and all 10 of those movies have in common? Though their plots are kind of fantasy and extreme and extraordinary and wild, underneath of that, what also connects us to those movies and connects us to the stories are the everyday people experiencing everyday problems. Like in every single story, there is loneliness that is where people are seeking out meaningful relationships. Or there's fractured and broken relationships. There's a psychology, there's a depression, there's some sort of loss or grief or pain. In all of these stories, despite the surrounding, there is something core and central to who we are as humans. And I want you and I to see that today, because Daniel chapter 2 gives us some super simple, you can leave today and put these into practice principles for how to faithfully live out the kingdom life for Jesus. Let me show you. Look at the first couple of verses again. In the second year of his reign, that would be the third year of his reign and how we would understand it. The first year was the ascension. Think of it as the inauguration. And then he begins his reign. Nebuchadnezzar had dreams, and the dreams troubled him, and his sleep deserted him. So the king gave orders, and he summoned the magicians, mediums, sorcerers, and Chaldeans to tell the king his dreams. And when they came and stood before the king, he said to them, I have had a dream, and I'm anxious to understand it. Now I want you to get this first lesson from Daniel chapter 2, and it's this: everyone needs wisdom. Pay careful attention to the narrative here. Nebuchadnezzar is the most powerful human on planet Earth. He is the wealthiest human on planet Earth, and he is the most feared human on planet Earth, and he has a dream, and it freaks him out, and he can't sleep, he's scared, he's nervous, and he's anxious. Now, does that sound like anyone you know? And some of you are not raising your hands, but you're thinking, it sounds like me. Have you ever lost sleep over something? Have you ever been troubled? Have you ever been anxious? Then right here in the passage, one of the things that's showing us that if Nebuchadnezzar is nervous and anxious and having a bit of a panic attack, then anyone in this room is a candidate for it. It doesn't matter your position in life. It doesn't matter where you're at. You and I are all candidates to go through things and face things that make us go, man, I don't know what to do about this. So Nebuchadnezzar, he brings his council together. You and me might imagine it as like a presidential cabinet. And he wants these enchanters, these magicians, to interpret his dreams. Now that seems foreign to us, but in this particular culture, that was the way a king or someone with wealth and nobility would figure out what the gods wanted him to know and to do. And some of you are in a similar boat to Nebuchadnezzar. It might not be a dream, it might be a dream, but some of you are probably facing financial troubles and difficulty and stress and pressure, and you have been for a long time, and you wonder, am I ever going to get ahead? Is there ever going to be any margin? How are we going to pay for these things? Maybe you're facing a medical bill or some unknown expense, and you're just like, I'm just not sure how it's going to measure up. Some of you might be facing significant career path decisions. And maybe there's 2 or 3 jobs out there, and you're trying to discern, is this the right path for me? Is this the right path for me? Some of you are in that stage of life where you're thinking about where you're going to go to college, and all of a sudden everybody said, what career path have you mapped out the next 60 years of your life? Because you need to know it by the time you're 18 so that you can pick the right degree. And you start to hyperventilate because you don't know. You don't know what you want to do. You just want to graduate. And you begin to wonder, like, if that's you, like you need wisdom. Some of you are in a spot in your life where marriage, children, parenting, you're facing some situations, some issues. You're facing some difficulty. Things have cooled off, or your kids seem out of control, and you're like, I just don't know what to do. You need wisdom. Maybe you're just facing unique, overwhelming burdens and challenges. Maybe like Nebuchadnezzar, anxiety, difficulty sleeping, and fear grips you. It might be because of something that's going on in your life that's completely out of your control. It might be a medical thing, emotional thing. It might be spiritual. It might be that you remember when you had certain energy and passion for the Lord, and that seems to have faded, and you're like, Lord, I want to recover that, and I just don't know what to do. You need wisdom. There may be some who have faced exactly what Daniel and his friends face seemingly week after week. They face these ethical crises, and maybe you're in a spot where you're facing that, and you need wisdom and courage to figure out where to go. And regardless of who you are in life, Regardless of your social background, your ethnic background, no one is exempt from this. We all need wisdom. It's relatable. Number 2, here's what Daniel 2 shows us. We need wisdom, every one of us, but none of us can buy wisdom. Nebuchadnezzar, he's the richest, most powerful man in the world. He brings in his presidential cabinet, if you will, and he says, I've got a problem. I've got a dream. It's causing me anxiety, and I need you to interpret it. But Nebuchadnezzar goes a step further. He is so worked up, he is so anxious, and presumably he is so frustrated by his inner council that are functioning as yes men, who have probably just told him whatever his ears wanted to hear, and that's things haven't worked out so well for Nebuchadnezzar. He comes to that cabinet and he has an extreme ask. He says, not only do I want you to help me understand the meaning of this dream that is bothering me, but to make sure you're not fooling with me, I need you to actually tell me the dream that I had. It's extreme. It's not legitimate. I mean, look at the Chaldeans' response. Their response makes perfect sense. Verse 10, they answer the king. No one on earth can make known what the king requests. Consequently, no king, however great and powerful, has ever asked anything like this of a magician, medium, or Chaldean. What the king is asking for is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods whose dwelling is not with mortals. Now, I want you to take that last little sentence there, highlighted in yellow, tuck that away back in your mind because we're going to come back to that at the very end. It's a really important sentence. But here's the thing, their argument's legitimate. They cannot know what they cannot know. Now, how does this relate to us? In 1995, Daniel Goleman authored some groundbreaking research in a book that became a New York Times bestseller called Emotional Intelligence. And in his book, Goleman cites research that asserts that IQ has no correlation to your happiness, your success, your financial standing, or your relationships in life. That despite the emphasis on be smart, know a lot of things, IQ doesn't affect that. What his book shows is that it's actually EQ, emotional intelligence, that has the greatest correlation to your future happiness, success, relationships, and so forth. And he cites a study. In this particular study, they took a group of college students whose IQs varied wildly. So those on the lower spectrum of the IQ and the upper spectrum of the IQ, and then they tracked and traced their lives over the course of several years. And they measured through interviews of whether they were happy, if they felt fulfillment, if they had met the goals, if they were successful financially, relationally, and all of those sorts of things. And they found absolutely no connection to IQ to those things. But what they often found was significant connection between emotional intelligence and success, both in career, personal life, spiritual life, and so forth. And here is how they identified, or how they described EQ in Goleman's book, Emotional Intelligence. A person's EQ is their zeal and internal motivation for life. A person with EQ has empathy and love for others. A person with EQ thinks not just for today, but has hope that determines how they think about the future. Now, what does that sound like? That sounds an awful lot like wisdom. You and I, we can't buy wisdom. We live in the information age. We can't Google wisdom. You can acquire information. Matter of fact, we have acquired more information and more data than at any time in human history. You guys probably do the same thing I do. Whatever whim of information or question pops into your mind, you ask Google or Alexa and they tell you. Like we sit at the dinner table and somebody has, what does Simon's middle name mean? And we just start asking Alexa and Alexa starts telling us. So we've got all this information. But all that data that we have, I think if you were to just look at the newspaper or your favorite news website, it would show you that on a corporate level, lots of information and data has not correlated to human happiness on a global and corporate scale, but also not on a personal scale. You see, you and I, we know some really smart people who have made some big blunders in life. Despite their EQ, despite their intelligence, despite all the information they had, they really made poor choices. And the truth is some of us are the smart people that we know that really made some big blunders in life. Maybe you fall into the category of you could run a business with the best of them, but you just can't gain any ground at home. You can code a website and craft HTML from scratch, but you struggle in your relationships. You make really good money, but you struggle financially. You know lots about the Bible. You even listen to many podcasts, but you constantly struggle spiritually. Our challenge and our problem is not an information problem. It's not a data problem. It's a wisdom problem. You and I need wisdom. We can't just buy it, though. Which leads us to number 3 today. God is the author and giver of wisdom. An execution order has been given to execute all of the king's counselors, of which Daniel and his 3 Hebrew buddies belong. Word gets to Daniel, and this is what Daniel does. Here's verse 14. Then Daniel responded with tact and discretion to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who has gone out to execute the wise men of Babylon. He asked Arioch, the king's officer, "Why is the decree from the king so harsh?" Then Arioch explained the situation to Daniel. So Daniel went and asked the king to give him some time so that he could give the king the interpretation, parentheses, which he doesn't have. Verse 17 said, then Daniel went to his house, and he told his friends, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, about the matter, urging them to ask the God of the heavens for mercy concerning this mystery, so Daniel and his friends would not be destroyed with the rest of Babylon's wise men. I want you and I to watch this framework for how Daniel chooses to live in a pattern of wisdom. This is Daniel's living and acting in wisdom. Number 1, Daniel responds to the urgency, but he does so without panic. Now, I don't know how you would roll, but if word got to me that there was an executioner who was going to execute me because my colleagues had dropped the ball at the office, I'm not making an appointment with the executioner to have a conversation with him. Like, I'm scrounging up every bit of cash I have. I'm trying to imagine how Jason Bourne and all those guys did at the movie where they got all these passports. And I am trying to get out of Babylon. I'm sneaking out. I'm hiding. I'm growing or shaving a beard, changing my appearance. I am laying low. Daniel receives really bad news. Bad news, death sentence attached to you. And his first move is to act with discretion and wisdom. And he goes right to the source. And he says, hey, can you help? And he asks a question. He gets all the data. What's the problem here? And then he takes another step further. He goes to a clearly unstable king and says, King, I need you to give us a stay of execution. I will get you the interpretation, which, by the way, he doesn't have yet. Now, here, what do we see here? We see Daniel not reacting, but we see responding. And why can Daniel act in calm in chaos? How is it that Daniel can respond with such discretion and wisdom and not panic and make the situation worse? Do you and I do that? Like when something goes wrong and it's not what you planned, like you had your day laid out, you had your budget planned out, you had your year planned out, and something interrupts it. And I don't know about you, but oftentimes the slightest little interruption to how I had planned and anticipated my day to go or my life to go sends me into chaos, sends me into panic. And I start taking out my anxiety and my frustration out on everyone else around me because somehow or another my life has just got altered a little bit. Does anyone else besides me in the room do that? I hope so. Actually, I hope you don't do it, but I think you do. I've talked to your spouse. You do it. So what is it that gives Daniel the calm and the courage to respond calmly in chaos? Remember the theme of this book? The theme of the book is this: God is in control even when your world is out of control. To Daniel and to his buddies, this was not a bumper sticker slogan for their Christianity. It wasn't just something that they tweeted. It wasn't just something that they said when they came to church that made them so spiritual. In the fibers of their being, they believed this. And they believed if God is truly in control, even when everything else seems to be out of control, that I need not panic. I need not collapse. I need to trust. And that's what Daniel does. He doesn't get freaked out by the problem. He trusts in God. His conviction was deeply rooted in that. Let me show you a second thing. Daniel takes his problem to the right kind of friends, wise friends. Notice, too, in this passage that we just read, I think this is something really important to point out. Daniel's three friends, really throughout the entire book of Daniel, are referred to there by their Babylonian names, except here. When Daniel is talking about the friends he went to with the crisis, he calls them by their Hebrew names. Now, here's why I think this happens. Daniel is referring to his brothers. He's referring to his foxhole comrades. He's referring to his closest community. He's referring to the people who are wise and who have his back. This is not just a casual reference. When Daniel was faced with a crisis where he probably didn't know all the answers, his first move was to go to people he could count on. This is a big deal. So there's a lot of layers for us to think about in this, and so let me just make a couple of observations. One is you and I live in a society that encourages us to be more and more isolated. We live in a society where we get everything individualized and privatized, and we're rewarded for that. And as a result, generation after generation after generation, we've become more and more isolated. And when stuff, and you can fill in any definition for stuff you want, comes into our life, we bear the emotional, spiritual brunt of it alone. You and I, we need wisdom, but you and I, we need the right kind of friends in our life. All of us do. Now, part of the reason we have this isolation is about pride. Like we got an image to keep intact. And if something goes wrong in your marriage, if something's going wrong in your parenting, if your things are not going well with your finances, if your image is somehow or another going to be at risk, if this gets exposed, we hide it. But we do it to our detriment. And we do it because we haven't fully embraced and understood the gospel of Jesus Christ. And all of us are guilty of that. But I think one of the reasons is people just haven't found a tribe. And you and I, two things. We need to be people who are looking for a tribe of people who don't just tell us all the things that we want to hear and know, but who, when we're about to make foolish mistakes, will tell us that. Who don't run away from us when things get difficult and things get hard. But you and I also, hear me now, need to be the kind of people who are creating tribal space for people who need a tribe. Like you and I, we need to be the kind of people who, those of us who have been blessed and God has gifted us with people around us, need to have an awareness, a spiritual maturity to say, not everyone has a tribe. Who can I be a tribe to? Daniel had these buddies, Hananiah, Azariah, Mishael, and those three guys had Daniel. They had one another for a crisis moment. And you and I, we need the right kind of friends for these moments. We need to be the kind of people who are creating space for others to be a part of that. Number 3, let me wrap it up, and then we're going to share it around the table together. Daniel and his friends pray. Now, I know how simple that is. I know how Sunday schoolish that is, but I want you to see the contrast, at least to my own life. Crisis comes into your life, difficulty comes into your life. Like, what's our first go-to? I mean, it's to Google stuff. It's to start whiteboard session. It's to bring out pros and cons lists. It's to vent for 4 hours. It's to bemoan. And then you do strategy sessions. How are we going to fix this? How are we going to take care of this? How are we going to mitigate this? How are we going to control this? How are we going to keep the news from getting out? What am I going to do about this? What am I going to do about that? Daniel's got a problem that he can't fix. And his buddies don't gather at the local pub to spend 4 hours talking about how they're going to fix the problem. Their go-to moment thing in a crisis, we're going to come together and we're going to pray. We're going to start with the author and giver of wisdom and listen to him. We're going to take our burdens to him. Why do they pray? Because wisdom comes from God, yes. But I want you to see this other part of it. Daniel and his buddies knew something about the one true God that their Babylonian colleagues didn't. Remember what the Babylonian colleagues said? What the king is asking for is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. Daniel knew a different kind of God. Daniel actually knew a God whose name would eventually become Emmanuel, meaning that God dwells with mortals. Daniel knew a God whose desire was to both be Lord and Father. For those of you who are on Twitter, you'll know what this means. If you're not on Twitter, it's probably for your emotional health, so good job. But this particular tweet went viral this week. It was from the Atheist Forum, and they said this, Christianity. This is not a hack on atheists. You'll get the full picture in a second. Christianity, belief that one God created a universe 13.79 billion years old, 93 billion light years in diameter, that's 6 trillion miles for every light year, consisting of over 200 galaxies, each containing an average of 200 billion stars, only to have a personal relationship with you. And one theologian responded, I wish I'd paid attention to his name, and he said this. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Ross Duthon, who's a Christian, he's a columnist in the New York Times, retweeted this cell, and he said, well, not only me. The point being that is exactly the message of the gospel. It's the beauty of it. And here's the thing, even if you struggle believing it, I guarantee you everyone in this room wants it to be true because your heart yearns for it. So God responds to Daniel and his buddy's prayer. Look at verse 19. The mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision at night, and Daniel praised the God of heavens. God gave Daniel the wisdom and understanding he needed for his moment of crisis. And when he did, Daniel didn't beat his chest. They didn't brag about how smart they were. They praised and worshiped God. Matter of fact, here's their chorus of praise. May the name of God be praised forever and ever, for wisdom and power belong to him. Both the understanding, the knowledge, the insight belongs to him, and the power and the might to accomplish it belongs to him. He changes the times and the seasons. He removes the kings and establishes the kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals the deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and light dwells with him. I offer thanks and praise to you, God of my fathers, because you have given me wisdom and power, and now you have let me know what we asked for you have let us know the king's mystery. Daniel praises God for being a God who both knows and gives wisdom, and a God who is powerful enough to make it work in his life. And so then Daniel goes to the king, and look at this, and look at his approach with the king. Daniel replies, the king said in reply to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me the dream I had and its interpretation? Daniel answered the king, no wise man. And don't you know that, like, as the other guys are in the room and Daniel says, no wise man can do this, that they both go, oh gosh, like we waited all this time, now we're just going to get slaughtered right here. But that's not how it goes. Daniel says, no wise man, medium, magician, or diviner is able to make known to the king the mystery you asked about. But there's a God in heaven who reveals mystery, and he has let King Nebuchadnezzar know what will happen in these last days. A couple things I want you to see from this. One, God used the moment of crisis as a way for hundreds of thousands probably to hear the magnificent good news of who he is. This moment begins a process through which Nebuchadnezzar, whom next week we'll see, is not a good new convert. His spiritual journey is slow. But all of a sudden, Daniel, a man whose religion and faith and identity with his God as far as public space has been stripped away. He finds himself where he's trying to just being faithful to his God, but he's cooperating with culture. And in a moment of crisis, God uses that moment for Daniel to speak truth to people who do not know of his God. You and I, one of the wisest things we could do is when difficulty comes into our life is to reframe it. Instead of getting locked inside of our heads and seeing, woe is me, why is this happening? Instead ask, God, what might you want to have accomplished out of this? How might you display your glory in the midst of this difficulty? How might you shape all of this chaos for your glory? God uses that moment to do that for Daniel. But also, I want you to notice this, and I want us to have less anxiety over this. The Christian life cannot be explained or lived solely in explainable and natural terms. The whole foundation for the belief of Christianity is a resurrection. Like it starts and ends with the extraordinary. Is there reason? Is there rationale? Absolutely. But here is where Daniel intersected with how his God operated. Daniel was supremely aware of his limitations and simultaneously supremely aware of his God's limitlessness. You and I, there's all sorts of things that you and I could confess honestly and truthfully and say, I don't know how to do that. I'm not sure how this is going to work out. I don't know. And simultaneously say, but there is a God in heaven who loves me, who knows my name, who wants to have a personal relationship with me and is at work, who is in control even when my world seems out of control, and he is at work even when I don't realize it. So Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar that his empire is, in his reign, is going to collapse. And after him, another is going to rise, and it's going to collapse. And another will rise, and it will collapse. And another will rise, and it will collapse. But one day, symbolized by this stone, a king and a kingdom will rise, and that stone will crush all other kingdoms. And here's how that's described in Ephesians chapter 2 in your New Testament. For through him we both have access in one spirit to the Father, so then that you are no longer foreigners and strangers, here exiles. You are no longer exiles. You are no longer left without a father, a spiritual family. But no, you're no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with the saints and members of God's household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Jesus Christ himself as the cornerstone. In him, the whole building being put together grows into a holy temple in the Lord. In him, you are being built together for God's dwelling in that spirit. I want you to see the gospel previewed in Daniel. Every empire that Daniel references, from the Medo-Persian Empire all the way to the Roman Empire, rose and fell the same way. A powerful dictator violently took authority, and then his empire used violence to subdue all the surrounding people to gain more wealth and more power and influence. And in the middle of the supposed last empire, the supposed empire that would end all empires, the Roman Empire, the most violent of all, a little baby is born to poor, homeless teenage parents. But this was not just any baby. It was a baby who would become the cornerstone himself, and he would be the one who would crush all other kingdoms and set up a kingdom that would never be crushed. But Jesus would do it differently than every dictator in human history had done before. Every other dictator had used his power to crush everyone else around him. Jesus himself would be the one who would be crushed. He would be bruised. He would be slaved. He would be exiled from heaven so that you and I could be ransomed and set free and be part of the family and part of the kingdom. That's the gospel all the way previewed in the Old Testament to the New Testament, and it's for you and me. You and I, we don't have to live as exiles because another king crushed all the other kingdoms that would hold us down and has set us free. And so this morning, if you're not a follower of Jesus, here's the beauty of the invitation. Almost all of these empires were socially and ethnically constrained. You either had to have a certain amount of money and property to fit in, or you had to be the right ethnicity. Jesus sets up a kingdom. It doesn't matter if you're wealthy or poor, Asian, black, white, whatever your stratosphere, man, woman, you are a part of this kingdom. You're an invitation in. Not only does he do that, but he doesn't just invite those who have their lives together, which I know we don't all have our lives together, but you know, it's West Knoxville. We sometimes pretend like we got our lives together. He invites everyone, regardless of their baggage, regardless of their sin, to the table through his shed blood on the cross. He makes atonement for all of that, and he offers you his sonship and his daughtership free through faith. You have an invitation to his kingdom. And think about this. If you are a follower of Jesus, if you are a disciple, you are part of this kingdom. In the same way, Daniel and his three Hebrew buddies were agents of God for his work in Babylon. God has made you his agents to bring about his kingdom. Through the proclamation of the gospel, acts of love, the pursuit of justice, you and I, we partner with Jesus Christ through the Holy Spirit to continue the work with God, with Jesus, to build a kingdom that will last forever. That's what the whole thing's about. And you and I have been invited into that. Here's how we're going to end the service today. We're going to end it by celebrating it and symbolizing it. I'm going to go ahead and ask those who are going to lead our communion time to go ahead and come and be prepared. So when you think about this table, so if you're unfamiliar to the Christian tradition or communion, we have the bread and the cup here symbolized by the Lord's Supper. When Jesus had crushed every enemy on the cross, and when he had said it was finished, before that moment, he gathers the disciples and he says, here's what's going to come. My body is going to be broken, it's going to be bruised, it's going to be torn for you. And I want you to remember this moment for as long as you live. And for the last 2,000 years, you and I have participated with those original saints in this sacrament called the Lord's Supper. And so it is a picture of the gospel that you and I have been invited into the family of God, not because of what we've done, but because of what he's done for us. But I want you to also see that it is a picture of community. And I want you to remember Daniel and his buddies today. So we gather around a table, not by ourselves, but with brothers and sisters. And so as you gather around the tables here in just a moment, take a look at this space and recognize that, hey, this is not just some random person. I'm not here by myself. I am a part of a family. And so while we receive communion, one of the things we encourage you to do, and if you're sitting alone, scoot somewhere else, is to use this time to talk to your brothers and sisters. There is a sacredness in just laughing with each other and praying for one another and catching each other up on your stories. You want to build a tribe, you've got to know people and you've got to become intertwined. Hear people's stories. Ask your neighbor there in your row, how's life going for them? How can you pray for them? Just get to know one another. Spend some time talking. Don't spend time in isolation. But mostly today, as we gather around the tables, let's do it in the joyful celebration that Jesus has set us free. Let me pray for us, and then ushers, if you can go ahead and position yourselves, we'll get started. Father, we come to you this moment, grateful for the truth of who you are, grateful that you're the giver and author of wisdom, that, Lord, you demonstrate it, you grant it, you model it for us. Help us to lean into who you are and what you have given us to do. Help us to be a people who choose to follow you and seek after you with all of our hearts. And may our time together today, celebrating you and the table, bring you worship, honor, and glory. In Jesus' name, amen.